It was a Monday night in mid-November, and the rain had already been coming down for hours. I had just gotten off work at 8 p.m. driving through winding rural backroads to the mountainside home I was renting in the highlands of North Carolina. The area was remote, tucked between forested slopes, with no visible neighbors from my property. The isolation was something I'd come to appreciate until this night. I got home, dried off, and fired up my PC to hop online and game with a few of my buddies. Since my divorce a few months earlier, I'd been spending most of my free time online. Outside of work, I had little else to do. The house was quiet, my nights uneventful, so I dove into hours of gaming, the kind that helps the loneliness fade, even if only temporarily. There had been weather warnings earlier that day. Strong storms, flash flooding, but those always popped up anytime it rained hard out here. By 11 p.m., I was mid-match when a sudden gust of wind slammed into the house. The windows rattled, the floor groaned, and I froze. A split second later, the lights in PC flickered, then blacked out. I sat there, enveloped in pitch darkness. The silence was broken only by the deafening rain and the occasional boom of thunder. I reached around for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stumbled downstairs to look outside. Through the torrential rain, it was impossible to tell if anyone else had lost power. From my vantage point, all I could see was forest. No lights, no signs of life. The house had become a black shell in the middle of a storm. Frustrated, I sent a quick message to the group chat saying I was off for the night. Then I made my way to the basement, hoping to find the old backup battery bank I'd stored there. I hated going to sleep in total darkness. The silence made every sound feel amplified. I found the battery pack and lugged it upstairs. As I was climbing the stairs, I heard a soft sound, like a shuffle or a scrape coming from behind the storage boxes. I paused, waited, and told myself it was just the wind or shifting debris. Plugging in a small lamp, I lit up the living room and sat down. The glow cast long shadows across the walls, shadows that moved whenever lightning flashed. It wasn't comforting. The rain pounded harder, and the house groaned with every gust. I sat awake, unable to rest. Sometime after midnight, I opened the front door to check the sky. The porch overhang kept most of the rain off. I stared out into the storm. In the distance, on a ridge across the valley, I saw lights flickering from a cabin. Someone else still had power. That made me stop. Just as I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize: power outage. Expect extended delays due to line damage. No company name, no ID. Just a plain message. It didn't feel right. I stared at the screen, rereading it. Something about it felt calculated. Why would someone send that directly to me? I tried brushing it off and went back to the couch, trying to relax. I scrolled through some old downloaded videos on my phone and watched the rain. Then I heard it again. A single, unmistakable creak from the wooden stairs leading to the basement. I knew that sound. It wasn't the house settling. It was weight, pressure. I stood slowly and moved toward the hallway. My phone's flashlight barely lit the corridor ahead. When I turned the corner, I saw the basement door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. I froze, staring down the pitch-black staircase. My heart pounded so hard, it echoed in my ears. I slowly walked up to the door and, without descending, closed it carefully. My hand was trembling. Something was wrong. I turned and stepped into the dining room, thunder flashing light across the windows. I looked around. Nothing. Then it happened. A violent rush of footsteps came slamming up the basement stairs. The door, now closed, shook violently. Someone was on the other side. I reacted instinctively, throwing my weight against the door just as the knob twisted and the frame thudded from an impact. It wasn't random. They were ramming the door, shoulder after shoulder, trying to burst through. The door didn't have a lock, just a handle. I was trapped. I grabbed my phone and called 911. As soon as the dispatcher picked up, the pounding stopped. I stood there, breath caught, muscles tense. I heard retreating steps, slow and deliberate, descending into the silence below. I didn't wait. I bolted out the front, jumped in my car, and drove halfway down the road before turning off the engine and watching the house. I didn't see movement, nothing. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. They searched the house top to bottom. No one was there, but the back door had been unlatched. Muddy prints were scattered along the floor. Whoever had been in my basement had entered through the back during the storm. The power? They cut it manually. The message? Sent from a personal phone. He knew I'd checked the power. He knew I'd checked the basement. He didn't want me to call for help. He wanted to catch me off guard. He had been watching me, stalking me, and had the storm not masked the sounds, had I gone to sleep instead of staying up, I don't know what would have happened. Even now, months later, I can still feel it, that moment of pressure on the door, the sense of someone waiting just on the other side. Isolation, stalking, chilling silence. Whatever he came for, he didn't get it that night. But I don't think he was finished. I've since installed cameras, locks, motion lights. I double-check everything. I rarely sleep well when it rains, because in the dark, when the wind returns and trees whisper in the forest, I remember, I wasn't alone. I was never alone. Henry and I had planned the trip for weeks. We weren't seasoned campers by any means, just two lifelong friends with a growing itch for something different. Our past adventures had been limited to family campgrounds or forest edges where you could still hear cars passing on nearby roads. But this time, we wanted the real deal. Real isolation. Real wilderness. We found a place through an old hiking forum. A spot deep within the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Not marked on maps. Not part of a national campsite. Just a remote clearing known by a few, accessible only by a faded trail after a long winding drive off the main highway. We packed for 3 days, loaded the truck, and made the drive. The gravel road leading to the trailhead was barely wide enough for our vehicle and looked like it hadn't seen use in years. It dead-ended at a patch of weeds and dirt, not a soul in sight. No cars, no signs, just wilderness. We got out, shouldered our backpacks, and started the hike. The trail was overgrown in parts and nearly invisible in others, winding through thick forest and climbing steep ridgelines. But 4 hours later, we reached the clearing, a grassy rise atop a knoll, overlooking a sea of trees rolling endlessly in every direction. No cabins, no lights, no voices, just the sound of wind threading through the leaves. It was exactly what we wanted. We set up camp. Henry struggled with his gear, so I took the chance to explore a bit. I walked up the slope to where the view was best. As I stood there, taking in the quiet beauty, something caught my eye. Movement. Figures below, moving through the trees. At first, I thought it was just the wind-shifting shadows. But no, it was people. 4, maybe 5 of them, walking slowly through the forest below. Their outlines were vague, dark, and too distant to identify clearly. I called Henry over, but by the time he reached me, the group had vanished. We brushed it off. Maybe other hikers. Maybe locals. Either way, they hadn't come near us. We spent the next few hours chatting around the fire, joking, trying to enjoy our first night off grid. Then the night arrived. It was darker than we'd imagined. With the moon hidden by heavy clouds and no light pollution to speak of, the darkness felt suffocating. The only thing keeping it at bay was our small campfire, which crackled softly while we spoke in hushed tones. That's when we heard the voices. They were faint at first, distant murmurs weaving through the trees. Not quite clear enough to understand, but undeniably human. They weren't shouting or calling. It was like a casual conversation just out of earshot. Henry and I went quiet, staring into the forest. The voices didn't move. They stayed in place, floating in the distance. Then, as suddenly as they came, they stopped. No fading, no retreat, just gone. We sat there frozen, the silence now feeling louder than the murmurs. Then came footsteps, one set crunching through the leaves. Out from the forest stepped a man. He walked casually into the edge of our firelight. Tall, wiry, with long black hair tucked under a red baseball cap. He smiled widely. "Either of you know where the trail is?" "Been walking for hours," he said, voice calm and casual. I pointed back the way we'd come, saying, "Yeah, it's just up that way." He didn't move. Henry asked, "Are you with those others out there?" The man's expression shifted. His smile faltered just for a second. Then he shook his head. "Others? No. I've been alone all day. Haven't seen a soul. If there are others out here, I'd rather not run into them either." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked over his shoulder into the woods, then turned and slowly walked down the trail. The moment he disappeared into the dark, Henry and I both exhaled. "He's lying," I said. "Absolutely," Henry replied. That man had come from the exact direction the voices had. There was no way he hadn't heard them, or seen them. And why lie? Why pretend to be alone? We stayed by the fire, discussing what to do next. Every time we looked into the forest, it felt like something was watching us. The trees were too still, the darkness too deep. Then Henry said it, "We should go." I nodded. We stomped out the fire, packed our gear in record time, and got ready to leave. That feeling, that prickling on the back of your neck, only grew stronger. And then it happened. A single footstep. Loud, close. We froze. I turned slowly, flashlight in hand, and clicked it on. 10 feet away stood the man from before. Same red cap, same empty smile. No backpack, no gear, just standing there in the pitch dark staring. He didn't flinch when the light hit him. He didn't speak. He just smiled. I turned off the flashlight. Henry and I bolted. As we ran, more footsteps erupted from the woods, multiple sets, some behind us, some flanking us through the underbrush. They didn't shout. They didn't speak. They just ran. Branches whipped our faces, roots nearly tripped us, but we didn't stop. Eventually, the sounds faded. By the time we reached the trailhead and the truck, our chests were burning. We jumped in, locked the doors, and drove off without looking back. We never called the police. We didn't know what to say. There had been no crime, no names, no proof, just a feeling, a certainty. We weren't supposed to be there. Whatever was in those woods had been watching, waiting. And when we arrived, they decided to let us know just how alone and how surrounded we really were. We haven't gone camping since. And sometimes, late at night, when I wake up and hear the wind blowing through the trees outside my house, I think of that man's smile, of the silence after the voices. And I wonder, were they already waiting before we got there? Or did they follow us back? Isolation, stalking, and the kind of chill that never really leaves you. In the spring of 2021, I was 24 years old and living alone in a small studio apartment while attending graduate school in rural Oregon. My family was scattered across the country, and for the most part, I was used to the solitude. But when our school scheduled spring break unusually early that year, I decided to make the long trip to visit my parents back east. It was a 2-day drive across long, empty stretches of mountainous backroads and forested highways. I much preferred driving to flying, especially since my budget was tight and I could enjoy the scenery. I left early on a Tuesday morning, excited to be ahead of schedule. The plan was loose. I figured I'd just drive as far as I could that day and find a place to crash overnight before continuing the next morning. I drove nearly 10 hours, stopping only for gas and some quick food. Around 8:00 p.m., I was ready to stop for the day. The last town I passed had been miles back, and the next one looked far out. I pulled into a gas station and used my phone to search nearby hotels. There weren't many options, but one popped up just 10 minutes away. It was tucked deep off the main road, accessed by a narrow, unlit lane that wound through dense pine trees. I followed it for a while, passing by a scattering of rundown houses before entering a town so small it barely registered. At the far edge of this ghost town was the motel, a squat, weathered building that looked like it belonged in another era. The parking lot was empty. I grabbed my backpack and walked in. The fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered weakly, casting a dim glow over the small lobby. There was no music, no TV, no chatter, just silence. No one was at the front desk. I stood there a full minute, looking around. Something about the stillness unnerved me. Eventually, a woman emerged from a hallway behind the counter. She jumped slightly when she saw me, like she hadn't expected anyone. She quickly recovered, offered a smile, and checked me into a room. The room she gave me was at the far end of the hall, the very last door. I thanked her, walked down the creaky corridor, and entered. The room was simple, a small couch, a twin bed, and a dresser. It wasn't dirty, but it felt cold, lifeless. I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch, scrolling through my phone and relaxing after the long drive. Eventually, I must have dozed off. I was jolted awake by a loud knock. No, a bang on the door. It was forceful, sudden, and close. I sat up, confused. My phone said it was 11:00 p.m. I tiptoed to the door and opened it slowly. No one was there. The hallway stretched out, dimly lit and empty. I stepped out and looked both ways, but heard nothing. I waited a while, the hairs on my arms standing up, before retreating inside. Was it a dream? Was someone knocking on the wrong door? I wasn't sure, but the silence felt oppressive now. I locked the door tight, double-checked the latch, and decided to shake it off with a shower. I got ready for bed, set an alarm for 8:00 a.m. and tried to sleep. I needed rest before the next leg of my trip, but around 2:30 a.m. it happened again. A thunderous pounding on the door. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, yanking it open. Again, no one. The hallway was deserted. Shadows flickered slightly from the faint overhead light, but nothing moved. This time, I couldn't let it go. I threw on a hoodie and walked down to the front desk. The woman was still there, hunched over a small desk lamp. I asked her if anyone else had checked in or if she had seen anyone. She looked confused. "You're the only guest tonight," she said slowly, as if trying to make sense of my question. I didn't say much else. I smiled awkwardly and headed back to my room. But her words rang in my ears, "the only guest." Back inside, I checked the door again. Still locked. I turned on the lamp and sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. I tried watching something to calm down. And then I saw it. The glow from my phone lit up the far corner of the room, and there, in the darkness, was a silhouette. A man, standing, still, watching. I jumped back, nearly dropping the phone. My body seized in panic. I bolted toward the door, fumbled with the locks. Behind me, I heard the man move. Heavy footsteps thundered across the carpet. I ripped the door open and burst into the hallway. The front desk woman screamed as I came running, but her scream turned into something else, a gasp. Her eyes locked behind me. He was there. The man stepped into the hallway, just beyond the threshold of my room. Tall, lanky, face shrouded in shadow. Then he turned and ran. Not toward me, not toward the exit. Just down the hall, into the darkness. He vanished around the corner. The woman called the police. I stood shaking in the lobby. When the officers arrived, we checked the building. He was gone. The cameras were limited. One in the lobby, one at the back entrance. That was it. But the footage showed something chilling when I had gone to the front desk after the first knock. He had entered my room. He had waited, in the shadows, watching me sleep, waiting for the moment. No one recognized him. He didn't check in. No car was ever spotted outside. I grabbed my things and left before dawn. I didn't finish the drive home until the next night, too shaken to drive far. I still don't know who he was, what he wanted, or how he got in. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in a quiet room, I think about those footsteps, about that knock, and I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't woken up, or if I'd been too slow. Isolation, stalking, and a chill that still hasn't gone away.